It was a day like any other at the high-end retail store. Employees moved swiftly between racks of designer clothes, their professional demeanor masking something far more sinister that had gone unnoticed by most. The store was known for its elegance, its luxury items, and its impeccable service. But there was a dark undercurrent flowing through its operations, one that only a few had noticed and none had dared to confront. That was about to change. Mason Taylor, the black CEO of the entire chain, had built his company from the ground up. He was known for his sharp business mind, his leadership, and most of all, his belief in fairness. But lately he had begun to notice something disturbing within his stores. There were murmurs of discrimination, whispers of racist behavior that only surfaced when black customers entered the shop. The reports were sporadic, but consistent enough that they couldn't be ignored. So Mason decided to take matters into his own hands. He knew that if he walked into his own store as himself, the employees would be on their best behavior. They respected him, or at least feared his authority as their boss. But Mason wanted to see the truth for himself. He wanted to know exactly how deep the racism ran in his own establishment. So he devised a plan that no one saw coming. With the help of a professional makeup artist, he transformed his appearance. His skin tone was altered, a wig covered his usual clean-cut look, and his clothing was swapped for something far more understated than his usual suit. When he looked at himself in the mirror, even he barely recognized the man staring back. He was ready. Mason walked into the store like any other customer. No one paid him any special attention, no respectful nods from employees, no warm greetings that the store was known for giving. At first, things seemed normal. He browsed the racks, picking up a few items, waiting for someone to approach him. But soon, the subtle shift in attitude became all too clear. An employee nearby glanced at him with disdain, quickly turning away as though his presence was unwelcome. When Mason asked for help, the reaction was immediate and cold. One of the employees, a tall man named Adam, sighed heavily and approached him with a look of annoyance. "What do you want?" Adam asked, his tone flat and dismissive. Mason asked if a specific jacket came in another size, to which Adam barely looked at the item before responding, "I don't think you can afford that. Why don't you look in the sales section instead?" Mason was taken aback. It wasn't just the words, though they were bad enough. It was the contempt in Adam's eyes, the assumption that Mason, because of his perceived race, didn't belong in the store. He moved through the aisles, continuing his test, and each employee he encountered treated him with a similar attitude. They barely made eye contact, they spoke to him with condescension, and when he finally went to the register to purchase something, the cashier, a young woman named Jessica, made a point to handle his money with as little contact as possible. It wasn't just one employee. It wasn't just one isolated incident. Every person Mason encountered showed the same ugly, racist behavior. They had no idea that the man they were belittling, the man they were trying to push out of the store, was the very person who signed their paychecks. At the end of his shopping experience, Mason stood at the front of the store, taking in the full weight of what he had just witnessed. It was worse than he had imagined. The racism was pervasive, embedded in every interaction. He had seen enough. He returned home, removed the makeup, and let the gravity of the situation settle. The next morning, Mason arrived at the store in his usual attire: sharp suit, polished shoes, a calm but serious expression on his face. The employees stood a little straighter when they saw him enter, a stark contrast to how they had treated him just the day before. He called a meeting. Every employee gathered in the back of the store, confused but respectful as Mason stood before them. "I need to talk to you all about something very serious," he began, his tone even, but there was an intensity behind his eyes that made everyone pay close attention. "Yesterday, I came into this store as a customer, not as your boss, but as a regular person who wanted to shop here." There was a murmur of confusion among the employees. Adam shifted nervously. Jessica looked puzzled, but no one said anything. "I disguised myself," Mason continued. "I made myself look like someone you wouldn't recognize, and what I experienced was disturbing." The room grew tense as Mason detailed the events of the previous day. He didn't name names just yet, but he described the condescending tones, the dismissive looks, the clear racial bias that had colored every interaction. "I'm not just disappointed," he said finally, his voice growing quieter but no less powerful. "I'm angry. Angry that this kind of behavior is happening in my store. angry that you think it's acceptable to treat people differently based on the color of their skin. Now the room was completely silent. Some employees were wide-eyed with shock. Others looked down at the floor, unable to meet Mason's gaze. Adam's face was pale, and Jessica was biting her lip, clearly aware that she had been part of the problem. "And I'm not going to tolerate it," Mason said firmly. "This stops today." But Mason had more than just words in store for his employees. He wanted them to truly understand the pain they had caused, to feel the weight of the discrimination they had so easily dished out. "Starting tomorrow," he announced, "each of you will undergo an experience of your own. You will be transformed, just like I was. You'll be disguised as black customers, and I'll take you to stores and establishments where you'll face exactly the kind of treatment you've been giving out." The employees were stunned. No one dared to protest, but the looks on their faces said it all. They were terrified. Mason didn't flinch. He knew that this was the only way to make them understand. The next day, one by one, each employee was given the same transformation that Mason had undergone. They were disguised as black men and women, sent out into the world with Mason by their side. The roles had reversed. Now they were the ones facing the dismissive glances, the cold shoulders, the outright racism. At clothing stores, they were ignored. At restaurants, they were seated in the back or not served at all. They were followed in convenience stores, questioned about their intentions, treated like criminals before they had even spoken a word. By the end of the day, the employees were devastated. Adam, who had been so arrogant just days before, was visibly shaken. Jessica had tears in her eyes. They had all felt the sting of racism firsthand, and it had broken something inside them. When they returned to the store, Mason gathered them once again. "Now you know," he said quietly. "Now you felt it. The pain, the humiliation, the anger. This is what you've been putting people through, day after day. And it stops now." The employees nodded, some too overwhelmed to speak. Adam stepped forward, his voice hoarse. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I didn't realize. I didn't understand." Mason looked at him, his expression softening just slightly. "It's not enough to be sorry, Adam. You need to change. All of you do. And I'm going to help you do that." From that day forward, the store was different. Mason implemented new training, focusing on empathy, respect, and the importance of treating every customer with dignity, no matter who they were or where they came from. But he didn't stop there. Every week, after the store closed, the employees spent an hour working with local organizations, identifying other businesses with similar racist practices. They partnered with lawyers, law enforcement, and activists to root out discrimination wherever it thrived, turning their own mistakes into a force for good. It was a long journey, but in time the employees changed. They learned, they grew, and under Mason's leadership, they became advocates for equality, using their own experiences to educate others. As weeks turned into months, Mason and his team pushed forward with their mission to root out racism in their community. After each workday, they'd set aside time to focus on their broader mission, tracking down businesses, stores, and restaurants where they had heard about discriminatory practices. It wasn't easy. Some owners and employees denied the claims. Others pushed back defensively. But Mason and his now enlightened employees had something powerful on their side: empathy and experience. Together, they visited each establishment, starting conversations that were often uncomfortable but necessary. They spoke from their hearts, drawing on the pain they had experienced themselves during their undercover operation. Slowly, they began to win people over, not through force or aggression, but through the power of understanding. One evening, after closing time, Mason gathered the team for one of their regular debrief sessions. The team had become a family of sorts, united by a common goal. Adam, who had been the most resistant at the beginning of this journey, spoke up, sharing the details of an interaction he had earlier in the day. "I went to this coffee shop that had been reported for turning black customers away," Adam began, his voice more humble than it had ever been before. At first, the owner wouldn't listen. But I kept talking. I told him what it felt like, being on the receiving end of it. How it breaks you down, little by little. And after a while, something changed in his eyes. He got quiet. He actually apologized and said he didn't realize how bad it was. The room was silent as Adam spoke, but it was a silence filled with pride and hope. This was what they had been working for: the ability to not just call out racism, but to inspire change. They were making a difference, one small step at a time. In the months that followed, they didn't stop. They kept visiting businesses, speaking to owners, and sharing their stories. And each time they left a shop, they left behind the seeds of change. Slowly but surely, the discriminatory practices in their local area began to fade. Racist attitudes were being challenged, not just by Mason's team, but by other community members who had been inspired by their efforts. One night, Mason sat at his desk, looking over the reports. They had managed to reach almost every business in the nearby localities. The majority had made visible improvements, and in some cases, the change was remarkable. Racist signage had been removed, customer service policies had been rewritten, and staff members had undergone diversity and inclusion training. It was progress, real, measurable progress. But Mason knew it wasn't enough. The fight against racism wasn't something that could be won in a matter of months. It was an ongoing battle, one that required constant attention and effort. And though they had made significant strides in their own neighborhood, Mason was fully aware that the problem extended far beyond the boundaries of their town. "We've done good work," Mason said, addressing his team one afternoon. "But this is just the beginning. We've made changes here, in our community. But we all know the world is much bigger than this. Racism is still out there, in places we haven't touched yet. But we've proven that change is possible." The employees nodded, their faces filled with a new determination. They had come so far, and now they were ready to go even further. Mason paused, letting the weight of his words settle before continuing. "We may not be able to fix the world overnight, but if we can keep doing what we've been doing, one person at a time, one business at a time, then maybe, just maybe, this will grow. The change will spread, and one day, we'll look around and realize that what started here has reached places we never thought possible." The employees exchanged glances, feeling the enormity of the task ahead, but also the hope that came with it. They knew the journey wasn't over, and they were ready for whatever came next. In the following years, the impact of Mason's efforts began to ripple outwards. Word of their mission spread to neighboring towns, then cities. Other businesses began reaching out, asking for advice on how they could implement the same changes. Some even requested to undergo the same undercover experience that Mason's employees had gone through, wanting to feel firsthand the impact of racism so they could better understand how to combat it. Mason's company became more than just a retail store. It became a symbol of progress, a beacon for change. His employees, once blind to their own prejudices, became advocates for equality. They trained other businesses, spoke at events, and continued their mission long after the initial goal had been met. Years later, as Mason looked out at the city he loved, he knew the work wasn't done. There were still pockets of discrimination, still areas that needed to be addressed. But he also knew that they had started something that wouldn't stop even after they were gone. The seeds of change they had planted would continue to grow, and with each new generation, the fight for equality would go on. As the team gathered one last time, now years into their mission, Adam stood up, speaking for everyone. "We've come a long way," he said, his voice filled with pride and humility. "And we'll keep going. Because what we've learned is that change doesn't stop. It's a lifetime commitment. But now, thanks to you, boss, we know what's possible." Mason smiled. "Together we've made a difference," he said quietly. "And we'll keep doing it, one step at a time." They didn't have all the answers, but they had hope. And sometimes hope was enough to change the world.